Have you thought writing a musical started with the opening number? Think again. Before there's a note of music or a word of dialogue, there's one major decision we need to make. That's where we start today. Day one. Hi, I'm Scott. You're watching Inside Musicals, the channel for all things musical theatre. Now, I wrote my first musical when I was 17. I know, late bloomer. It wasn't great. A couple of okay songs, some interesting ideas, but the story kind of fizzled out because I just started at the beginning and kept writing. I didn't know where I was going and I didn't know how to bring it all together. So this series is everything I've learned since then and whatever I encounter on this new project. Now, I'm going to say this over and over. There is no one way to write a musical. This is my process, the choices I make and why I make them. And whether you adopt them, adapt them, or reject them is entirely up to you. But day one of writing a musical, not the time to talk music. Even if you're inspired by a particular style of music, until you know where that story's going, the music is irrelevant. And if you're that composer who says, well, story's not really my thing, in theatre and film, it's your thing and you'll be the better composers for it. So story's where we start. And this video is how I spitball ideas, how I think about story, and where I turn to for inspiration. Now, by story, I mean classical narrative, a grand argument, an intersection of plot, character, and theme. It has structure and stakes and something to say. And yes, there are conventions, but the result doesn't have to feel conventional. Because if you want to bring something fresh to musical theatre, remember that there are two stages to creating a story: the crafting and the form. Now, the crafting is the idea, the mechanics, what happens, and the point that's being made. And it's compelling because it embraces some of those conventions. Now, the form is how it's told, the package, what the audience notices, and that's where you can go to town and break the mold. But at this stage, I want to focus on crafting the narrative. And I want to distinguish this concept of narrative musical theatre from other theatrical musical events like concert, cabaret, follies, revue, spectacle, because they all lack crucial elements of story. So they're not emotionally compelling like a well-crafted narrative, which is what we're focusing on for this project. And see, that's the problem with the musical Cats, because it's a pageant, not a narrative. It's a parade of characters who sing about themselves. They rarely interact, they don't evolve, and the show doesn't really have anything to say. I mean, you can enjoy it as song and dance, but it's not classical narrative. Same with Cirque du Soleil, at least the shows that I've seen. Because yes, they create characters and a through line, but it's spectacle inspired by a theme. And it works on that level. It's a visual feast. You don't even have to understand the language to appreciate it. But there are no real stakes. And so you could walk in or out of the show at any moment and enjoy it just the same. So day one, I'm coming up with 12 different story ideas for a musical. No more than one paragraph each. And before you say that's overkill or you already have your perfect idea, just humour me. And if you're collaborating, try this exercise separately and, as I'll outline in the next video, pitch your ideas to each other. So why 12? Well, the number's kind of arbitrary, but the human mind is based on patterns. And whenever we problem solve, the first few ideas tread the same well-worn path. Predictable, cliché even. But beyond maybe 5 or 6, we're much more inventive, intuitive, creative. And we want to oil that machine to practice defining the heart of the story. So the first step is to work free and fast. We're not after perfection. We don't want to censor ourselves. So treat it like a game. Be as outrageous as you want. Just get the ideas out, because we'll refine them later. And with 12 stories, you might notice recurring themes, characters, relationships, the kinds of stories that are meaningful to you. And so even if you don't use any of these 12, they might lead you to your perfect idea, or they might illuminate aspects of the story you already have in mind. So give it a try. So 12 stories, however rough. So now we add a title, something catchy, evocative, attention-grabbing. And this is the feel of the piece. Now, it's not set in stone, so don't overthink it. This is our first opportunity to distinguish it from the other ideas. Then we add a genre, and this sets the tone of the piece. So first question, is it comedy or drama? And don't say dramedy. That's just hedging your bets. Like, you can't delve deeply enough to be drama and it's not funny enough to be comedy. So what do your instincts say? What world does it really live in? Because it can have elements of both, but is it more drama or more comedy? You know, when I was at film school, people would ask, what kind of film do you really want to score? I felt obligated to say intimate human drama, when what I really wanted to say was Harry Potter, fantasy adventure. The music's in your face, playful, colourful, dramatic. So don't be distracted by someone else's version of worthy. These are your stories. Be true to that. So now let's get specific. If you said drama, what kind of drama? Is it historical, political, domestic, action, adventure, crime? Is it a mystery, thriller, suspense? If it's comedy, is it satirical? Is it highbrow, lowbrow, farce, social comedy? Is it outrageous? Is it screwball? Is it romantic comedy? Because each of these styles implies certain conventions. So now we've asked a few questions, we want to refine our paragraph. We want to touch on plot, theme, main character, and resolution, or at least suggest where it might go. Now, plot is simply what happens and how each action or decision necessitates the next. Theme is the argument that's being made, the premise that drives the story. The main character is the audience perspective. You know, their story is our story, and they embody one side of the thematic argument. And the resolution tells us how to interpret the events. Is it good or bad for the main character? And how does this somehow illuminate the theme, demonstrate the theme? In Legally Blonde, Elle plans to marry the senator, but when he calls off the wedding, she wants to prove herself worthy, to win him back. But in the process of proving herself worthy, she becomes someone who values herself higher than just a trophy wife. So at the end, she marries someone who values that in her, proving the premise that being valued is more important than being worthy. Now, in our paragraph, we don't have to know every twist and turn. We don't even have to know exactly how it ends just yet. But if someone else were to read it, we want them to go, oh, okay, I get it. I see where it's going. The key here is simplicity, because the clearer it is now, the more useful this paragraph will be later. So thinking about what draws us to the idea, whether it's the character, theme, situation, try to convey the potential for things to get complicated for the main character. And I like to think in terms of complications rather than conflict, because petty differences are conflict, but they're not innately dramatic. I mean, just watch any reality TV and notice how they play on petty differences and how contrived that can feel. And then ask how your story escalates to either decision or action by the main character that resolves the story. This could be where they're finally held to account, some kind of reckoning, a moral dilemma, a difficult decision, because this is where they show their true colours. In a happy ending, it's where they grow. In a tragedy, it's where they suffer as a result of their own limitations. Now, in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, A New Hope, it's all been leading to defeating the Empire by destroying the Death Star, and it all comes down to Luke. Now, up till now, he's solved all his problems as an impetuous, adventure-seeking farm boy, and Obi-Wan has got him out of scrapes. But by the end, without Obi-Wan, he has to trust his intuition, the Force, rather than the computer. And this is the test of his character. So if we wrote a paragraph for Star Wars, it could be when a farm boy's family are killed by the Empire, he joins the rebellion for adventure and revenge. But with the help of Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, the fate of the rebellion rests in his hands. And it's not every plot point, it's just the potential. Now, in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and I'm using films because we can all reference the same source, Indy's relied on his archaeological skills to rescue his father and find the Holy Grail. Toward the end, when he enters the temple, there's a test called the Leap of the Faithful. This is not necessarily the classic leap of faith for Indy. It's a challenge for him, but it relies on the knowledge he already has. That the real test of his character comes as the temple tumbles around him and the Grail falls into the chasm. You know, the one thing he can't do as an archaeologist is to let it be destroyed. So this test of his character is whether his obsession to retrieve it will kill him, or whether he can overcome his instincts and let it go. And this proves the premise that obsessive pursuit destroys itself. Whereas the Nazis succumbed, Indy outgrows it. In Toy Story, Woody resents Buzz for being the new favourite toy. But at the end, when Woody has the chance to save himself and get back to Andy, he puts aside his jealousy and risks everything to save Buzz. Because friendship is more important than jealousy. That's what toys are all about. And this is his character's growth. Whereas Othello, in Othello, is destroyed by his jealousy because he cannot outgrow his limitations. And this is how theme is connected to character. And this is premise. Now, when I first learned about the idea of premise, I really struggled to find the right one. But there is no right one. It's just a tool to give us clarity and focus. The right one is the one that's most useful to you, the one that's most persuasive in telling your story. So try a few out until you find the one with the most potential. And remember, while premise is a universal truth, it doesn't have to be true all the time. You're only proving in your story that it's true for this character in this situation. For example, in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, selfish is bad, selfless is good. But in a different story, what if you were so selfless that you're always taken advantage of? Now, in that instance, the premise might be that indiscriminate selflessness leads to its own destruction. So think of premise as the stance you take on an issue and your story as the means to prove it, the evidence for why it's true. So what's at the core of your story? What's the one idea that if you reduced it all down, drives everything? And if you find yourself saying, but my story's more complex than that, it's about a lot of things. And I might say, well, all of those things could be there, but what's the hierarchy of ideas? And which one is most prominent? And which of those drives the main character? Because if you can't define it, you risk trying to resolve one storyline with another. You know, if I asked, what time is it? And you said blue, then strictly speaking, you've responded to my question, but you haven't actually addressed it. It's a tangent. Same with story. The ending needs to pay off the beginning or the audience feels cheated. So it's okay to be reductive for now. That's just clarity. And that's where premise comes in. Here's another example. Love Actually seems very complex on the surface because there's a lot going on. And there's no one main character. That's because it's actually a series of overlapping short films, each with its own main character and each following classic storytelling structure. But they all prove the same premise, that love brings us together. Same idea from different angles, and that's how they're connected. Some characters choose wisely, some poorly. One of them chooses family love over romantic love, but love brings them together. And while it's masterfully handled, the length of the film doesn't allow any of the stories to be explored very deeply, but each one is complete in itself. And it's an example of how the form brings something fresh to the crafting. So now we understand the purpose of our paragraph, which is to see how things might snowball. Let's see how we can get there from different starting points. Let's say we start with a setup, say 3 people stuck in an elevator. But don't mistake setup for story. Setup is static and story is dynamic. And that's what we want. So for a story, how about an unhappily married couple stuck in an elevator in an abandoned building with the hitman the wife has hired to kill her husband? Now it's a story because we can see the potential for things to escalate. We might not know where it's going yet, but that's where theme comes in. What are we trying to say? Because that'll determine the ending. Now, if it's an indictment on the wife's ruthlessness, it has to end badly for someone. If it's a tragedy, it has to end badly for her, and maybe someone else as well. So what if the hitman starts to empathise with the husband, helps him escape? The wife refuses to pay him. A fight ensues. One or both of them are shot. And if she survives, maybe her opportunity to escape is blocked. Or she escapes only to find the police have arrived to see her with blood on her hands. But the point is she's destroyed by her inability to evolve. A tragedy. But if it's a comedy, what if the wife took out the hit to get her husband's attention, to prove how much she loves him? But when things get out of control, the husband and wife have to team up together to overpower the hitman, rekindling their love. Classic romantic comedy. What if we start with a title? Ship-faced, debauchery on the high seas. Okay, so it's provocative, but it's not a story yet. We don't even have a character. So we ask, whose perspective is it? Who do we most identify with, and who is best placed to prove the theme? The captain, cruise director, bar staff, an entertainer, a passenger? Well, let's ask about the theme. Now, if the theme is debauchery, are we arguing the pros or the cons, the benefit or the cost? Do we want a straight-laced character who needs to loosen up? Or do we need a debauched character who's yearning for something more in life, but without the courage to pursue it, is destroyed by it? And if you're not sure where or how the story needs to start, Identify the moment of reckoning, where the character is held to account, where they finally prove themselves, and then work backwards from there. What if we start our idea with theme, say morality? Okay, so let's say we have a devout woman who prides herself on her immovable moral code, but she's also selfish. When her son gets a girl pregnant, she covers up the pregnancy so it doesn't reflect badly on the family. But when she learns that the girl wants an abortion, her religious instinct is to persuade the girl to have the child at any cost. But when she learns that her son raped the girl, the real moment of reckoning is not whether or not to turn him into the police, which is a difficult decision, but whether she can give up something of herself, release her moral code to support the girl in her choice. So how could it end? Because we're not arguing the pros and cons of abortion, we're arguing the impact of a rigid moral code. Now, if it's a tragedy, there must be consequences for that character's inability to evolve. Maybe she doubles down on her position of forcing the girl to have the child against her will, whether by legal or other means. The son's arrested. The girl, when she finally has the child, resents this baby, but she cuts ties with the family and the woman never gets to meet her grandchild. It ends badly for everyone. But if I want to test my premise while I'm writing, maybe I could swap morality for pride, selfishness, stubbornness. Now, for a hallmark ending, maybe the woman swallows her pride to support the girl's choice. But then the girl, feeling supported and respected, decides to keep the child if the woman will embrace them both as family. Very daytime TV. But perhaps more realistically, the woman's growth is to put aside her personal beliefs and support the girl's decision to have an abortion. But believing with utter conviction she's done the right thing for someone else, she returns to a life more accepting of others. It all comes down to the point you're making. But let this paragraph raise some kind of question to pique our curiosity. So where do I look for inspiration? Because people say write what you know, but it doesn't mean autobiographical. It means write about a world you understand, a world you're an authority on, or at least something you're willing to research thoroughly. And of course, bring authentic experiences to your writing, but avoid autobiography unless you can be completely objective about the drama. Because it's too easy to be blinded by your own emotional baggage and assume prior knowledge in the audience. But just because it's meaningful for you doesn't mean it's innately compelling for an audience. So if you do write autobiography, ask yourself how you can make it compelling for someone who doesn't know you, and be prepared to take dramatic license to fill in those gaps. Now, the next most obvious is to adapt an existing property, a book, a film, a play, a song, a poem. But the challenge there is, unless it's in the public domain, it can be both expensive and time-consuming to obtain the rights. If you're going to do a commercial production, you must have the rights. Which brings us to classical literature in the public domain. Dickens, Shakespeare, the Brontes. Although a lot of that has already kind of been pillaged. Doesn't mean you can't be inspired by it though. Think of Wicked. It's based on the Frank L. Baum Oz books, but told from the perspective of the Wicked Witch of the West. Or Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. I mean, these are characters just plucked from Hamlet. So what characters could you borrow to build a story around? Could you come up with a prequel? A sequel? Hamlet 2. Back from the dead. You could turn to history, historical figures, or even just change history entirely. I mean, think of Bridgerton, revisionist England, or The Great with Elle Fanning, reinterpretation of Tsarist Russia. What if Attila the Hun was a misunderstood, peace-loving song and dance man with an uncanny knack for falling in the middle of foreign invasions, but defeating them through the power of dance, obviously? They exaggerate his reputation to save their own, thus the Attila that we come to know and fear. And this is the power of what if, of what's possible. You could be inspired by a current issue, true crime, an odd turn of phrase, a pairing of strange ideas. Whatever it is, if it occurs to you, write it down and ask, what if? What if depression really was a black dog? What if superheroes ended all crime and the world lived in peace and harmony? Would the superheroes turn to crime just to remain relevant? And here's an example of using what if. I saw a news story about a woman who was badly burned in a campfire accident, and she was thanking people for supporting her GoFundMe page. But there's something really insincere about it. Now, I think it was simply because she had no memory of the incident, But I thought, what if it was deliberate? What if her husband pushed her in? What if she asked her husband to push her in for notoriety, sympathy, for money? But what if it all went wrong and she was more badly burned than they intended? And what if, with all this money, the husband thinks, why would I spend all that cash on these pesky medical bills when her lungs could give out at any moment? There's a story in that, and not a pleasant one. It's about ruthlessness and the lengths people go to get what they want. Talking of getting what you want, write down your 12 ideas and join me in the next video where we narrow it down to the one best idea, because there's more to it than whether it's just a good story. And if you got this far through the video, oh boy, well done you, I'm impressed. Thank you so much for watching. I really do love you.